Well, seeing a lot more activity when it comes to loot box regulation than I expected. The UK has really been charging forward with the House of Lords recently calling for the immediate regulation of loot boxes to regulate them as gambling because, well, if a product looks like gambling and feels like gambling, it should be regulated as gambling, which goes without saying, but game companies continue to willfully be in denial and woefully continue to deny mounting evidence, such as this 50-page report that talks about why loot boxes can be so harmful and that relays how 12 out of 13 studies agree that there is a direct link between gambling and loot boxes, how one can affect the other, how people participating in one can encourage the other. And the stats here were pretty revelatory, and no doubt game companies will continue to say, but no, they're fun surprises. They're not unethical in any way, shape, or form, especially the way we implement them. The UKIE has already come up with the lame defense that they added content descriptors, basically a little label that reads in-game purchases, random items, which doesn't warn players about the harmful nature of the loot boxes because, well, the age rating doesn't reflect the implementation of loot boxes, which is why games like FIFA, the soccer casino simulator, is rated E for everyone when it definitely shouldn't be. But it isn't just the UK who is trying to get loot boxes regulated. Plenty of other countries have either started the process or intend to start the process, or at the very least have expressed their concerns about the rampant nature of loot boxes, and chief among them is Brazil. This is an article from News outlet Esports Observer published on April 1st, 2021, and I don't believe this is an April Fool's joke or anything of the sort. The headline reads, Brazilian justice opens process to ban loot boxes. So in Brazil, things do seem to be moving forward in a more expedient fashion than some other countries out there. Additional details are offered down here. Brazilian justice accepted an inquiry by the National Association of Child and Adolescent Defense Centers, ANSET from the acronym in Portuguese, to ban the commerce of loot boxes in the country. While this doesn't straight up just put a loot box ban into effect, the fact that the Brazilian justice accepted the inquiry does mean that there's going to be additional investigations and that the matter is being taken seriously on a legal capacity and that there is the potential moving forward for them to ultimately determine that ANSET is right and that loot boxes should be treated as gambling and regulated as such. And in Brazil, guess what? Gambling is illegal, and the main argument that ANSET makes is that the loot boxes are a harmful form of gambling, ergo should not be legal in Brazil. The inquiry also calls out specific companies who are partaking in loot box-based business models that are considered egregious, and well, just about all of the major ones are listed here, everyone from Activision to Electronic Arts, Riot Games, Garena, which I believe is a Brazilian publisher, Nintendo, Konami, Valve, Ubisoft, Tencent, Microsoft, Apple, Google, and Sony. And this is just scratching the surface. Take-Two and 2K are big in the loot box scene, and I would say Bethesda, but they were recently technically acquired by Microsoft, so I guess that fits the bill of Microsoft. But yeah, I mean, this isn't the short of it. I mean, this doesn't even count a lot of the mobile gaming companies out there. As for what ANSET is proposing in terms of consequences for companies who violate the gambling laws in Brazil by implementing loot boxes, well, any company that would commercialize loot boxes after their prohibition would be fined every single day up to 4 million Brazilian currency, which roughly translates to about $700,000 US. So that's per day that they keep loot boxes. For any of these major companies who are fined, the first couple of days will likely be chump change for them, but every single day, $700,000 roughly, that tends to add up. Currently, the process is still being analyzed by the country's judicial power. So again, the loot box ban is not currently in place, but the fact that things are moving to this degree does mean that the issue is being looked at seriously, and I would hope that they come to the same conclusion as the rest of the world, that the thing that looks and feels and functions like gambling is straight up just gambling, and game companies are getting away with it by just giving them a different name, loot boxes, surprise mechanics, whatever it is. This process will also give companies time so that they're not compelled to remove loot boxes from their stores immediately, but, you know, they should hopefully see the writing on the wall here. Now, obviously, I don't know which way this situation's going to go, if Brazil's going to capitulate to the game company's narrative that loot boxes aren't gambling, or if they actually do end up doing their jobs and seeing the obvious and enacting the proper regulations. But the game companies listed here, among many others, should be ready for the possibility that they soon will have to stop selling loot boxes in Brazil. The article then mentions other countries where loot boxes have proven controversial and where regulation has at least been talked about, from the US to Germany to, of course, the UK. But in Belgium and Netherlands, we all know that they actually moved pretty swiftly and legalized loot boxes, made them out to be gambling, and so they are enforced under the same gambling laws as, slot machines and casinos would be. Belgium in particular has been very strict, and already a bunch of companies were forced to remove loot box functionalities or the ability to pay for loot boxes in this specific country, while elsewhere people can still continue to buy them and interact with them. So if Brazil goes through with all of this, no doubt games like FIFA won't allow players to buy card packs anymore. And I imagine that FIFA is a relatively popular franchise in Brazil, given the popularity of soccer or football there. But the thing about markets like Belgium and Brazil is that they're not big enough markets to create a huge ripple effect to really put a major dent on these game companies, which is why I'm awaiting that bigger markets like the UK, where a lot of FIFA copies are sold, and of course the US, which I would argue is the biggest gaming market in the world, maybe second only to China, will enact similar regulations, because that would really cause a major ripple effect where game companies, because of how big the US and UK markets are, would be forced to change their business model across the board rather than just take out the ability to pay for loot boxes just for one market, one country. They would have to redesign the monetization model to kind of keep everything consistent across the board. Or at least I would imagine so, because it'd be weird to have a version of the game just for the UK, which is a big market where you cannot purchase loot boxes, but in the US you can. And, that would just create an imbalance. Whereas with Belgium, again, very small market, Brazil, also likely a small market, taking out loot boxes there, it just isn't as big of a deal. Not to mention that seeing major markets like US and UK, major countries and regions enact regulations for loot boxes would potentially snowball into other countries also joining the fray. Gaming is a global activity, and when big countries enact regulations because of potentially harmful aspects of gaming, like gambling-like elements that are marketed for kids and adults alike, that aim to gouge players with unreasonably low probabilities with no regulations to keep them in check, then word tends to spread. And that would make other countries consider enacting their own regulations as well. And the goal is that enough markets ban loot boxes that for all of these companies, it's no longer worth implementing them in games due to legal liabilities and fines that they could face and sales that they could lose from labeling their games, mature only or 18 plus, as they should be, because again, there's gambling in these games. And so while Brazil may not be the biggest market in the world, I am happy that they're looking into things and taking this seriously and joining the battle against what has been a monetization model that has gone far too unregulated for far too long. The more the merrier, I say. The more pressure can be applied to these game companies, the less they'll be encouraged to include loot boxes in games moving forward. And, the better games can turn out to be, because more often than not, and in my experience, 100% of the time, loot boxes make the experience worse. They're never implemented to enhance the experience. They're always implemented for profit and sacrificing gameplay integrity and artistic integrity for the sake of monetization. Any game that I can think of that has loot boxes in them, I can think of ways to get rid of them and make the gameplay loop more rewarding and more enjoyable. But anyway, that's everything you need to know about the latest on loot box regulations and the various countries' latest activities and latest processes on that front. Let me know in the comments below what your take is on the current state of loot boxes and what you think the future will look like for these so-called surprise mechanics. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.